Hello! Hi. This is Brandy Rose Smith, live from the Forbidden Library. And apologies for my weird half an hour start. In the most on-brand way possible. Hello, Snow Taco! Good afternoon, it's good evening for me. But yeah, on the most on-brand way possible, I lost track of time reading. But that does mean we get to do the thing. I actually have two books to tell you about again today, and the first one that I completed recently was BioShock prequel book. It was very fun. BioShock's one of the few horror games I've managed to actually get my butt through. Also, hello Luke! And this one is good. It's everything you'd expect. It goes from even just building Rapture to the break horribleness that you see at the end. Very good. If you're interested in more BioShock, I highly suggest it. Not sure what else to say about it though. It's good if you like BioShock. If you don't, then I'd probably give it a miss. But that's not the only thing I read. The second thing I read was a manga, because manga counts. Manga counts on my counter things. On books till freedom, because manga's a book. It's just got a lot of pictures. You still read it. It's still important. And it's the second Fate Grand Order Mortalis, which is basically just telling the main story of Fate Grand Order, which is great, because I love Fate Grand Order. I'm not up to date on it at all. It's so hard to get, caught up with it. Because there's so much dialogue and so much time reading, which is great. But I don't always have the time when I'm trying to read books and play other video games and stream and write books and have a full-time job. But it is fun to revisit the bits I have in this manga. This one has Marie Antoinette in it, and she's one of my favorite servants. I love her. She's fabulous. Vive la France! But that also means my not currently reading, that's the wrong one. Books Until Freedom can go down by 2 again. Why did that disappear? There we go. So 9, 8, 7, and go down to 7. 9,977 books. Until Freedom. We are well on the way. And now, we get to go to today's book. So today's book is Misperception by Peter J. McKenna, which we started last week. We are 14% of the way through, and I will do my best to summarize that 14%. And by summarize, I mean I'm going to summarize literally what happened in the book and not what I think happened. I'll do that afterwards. Because obviously this book is all about perception. And I have a different perception to what the main character has. Yes, that is a lot of books to go. It is, I will admit, Snowdago. But, you know, that's just a lot of fun reading, I guess. I could just read a lot of manga. Also, short stories count as well. So I can just read. I could completely cheat and go on to fanfic.net or AO3 and just read one-page fanfics. Exactly. I'm happy to keep reading, and I just have to live with the library for a very long time. I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm sure no weird supernatural hijinks will happen as long as I'm in the library. I'm sure everything will be fine. Yeah. Nothing goes wrong in mystical libraries, right? Right? Anyway, the summary of Misperception. So Misperception is about something called Felix. We don't quite know what Felix is yet. Who has been imprisoned all of their life, and the only things that Felix comes into contact with are the tormentors. There are 3 tormentors, 2 big ones and a little one. Something. Felix is a something. That is all we know. They open his cage. They pick him up and toss him around. They feed him this brown mush, and then they put him back in his cage, and they leave for the day. And they go upstairs. One day, the tormentors put him in a transport cell, and they take him out of the prison hall that he lives in, put him in a spaceship, and take him to what he assumes is the mothership, where there are so many other tormentors and people there. And as he goes further in, he can hear screaming for help, and he's convinced they're going to torture him. It's terrible. They give him something to put him to sleep, and he kind of wakes up, and they're operating on him, and then he falls back to sleep again. And then when he wakes up again, he's at home, and he's like, oh no, what happened? So he's all there as far as you can tell. So they haven't taken anything away from him, but they may have taken something away because he feels different. He doesn't know what, but he feels different. And eventually he starts to think, well, why did they do that? And there was someone else in the cage before him, because there's these scratch marks there that fit his claws, fit his nails. The book says nails. And he wonders what happened to them. And the tormentors have this lovely meat every day that smells lovely to him. So he suspects that meat may be his people, and that they're going to eat him next. So now he needs to escape. That is how the book presents what's happening. What I think is happening is Felix is some kind of very traumatized cat or rabbit, and the tormentors are just a family that own this cat and or rabbit. I'm going with rabbit because you don't normally lock your cats up. And they took said rabbit to the vet, who had an operation, and now they're back. That's what it seems to be for me. However, God knows what's actually going to happen with that. Is this cat/rabbit going to escape? Will we ever find out what Felix actually is? Let's go. Yeah, rabbits need to be locked up a little bit, but obviously Felix doesn't like it, it seems. Felix was convinced that he's the last of his race, and this has been some kind of alien takeover of his planet. And the tormentors have taken over the planet. Very poor, this poor traumatized whatever he is. Let's continue reading his adventure, shall we? Felix spent the rest of the day contemplating a plan while the tormentors patrolled the prison hall. One would pass by his cell every so often, while the other two remained at their posts. They were watching him especially vigilantly today. And them. It's not like he came back from an operation or anything, and they're just a family concerned about their pet or anything. Who knows? Who knows? I do, but I have tea. 1 second. When dusk came, Felix didn't have any more of a plan than he did the morning. Making it out of the cell wasn't his only challenge. The prison hall outside the cell was locked up tight. The only way out seemed to be the large front door at the entrance, but his captors always kept it closed. Of course, there were other doors in the prison hall, but these were always closed as well, concealing mysteries that were beyond even Felix's wildest imagination. Nevertheless, regardless of how overactive his imagination was, he couldn't even dream of opening any of these massive barriers. Besides, even if he could make it out, there were surely extra precautionary measures in place in the event of an escape. At the very least, there was a fence around the prison. Still, Felix knew that he had to try, and tonight had to be the night. He couldn't take another day of imprisonment, not knowing what cruel fate awaited him just around the corner. Fate needed to be taken into his own hands. Either he was escaping tonight, or he was going to die trying. The tormentors gathered around the large table in the mess hall for their evening meal as Felix watched from the shadows of his cell. He wondered with morbid curiosity how they intended to prepare him to be eaten. Boiled, baked, or perhaps even fried. All three sounded like a miserable end to an even more miserable existence. When they finished, the smallest tormentor began bringing over another heaping pile of brown mush on a plate. He stared up at the beast. It was grinning at Felix again. An emotion that he'd never felt before came over him. He no longer felt the same helplessness that he normally felt around them. What he felt instead was pure, unabated hatred. Oi. You're cool. As the beast drew closer and closer to him, Felix decided that after all this foul creature had done to him, after all the anguish and torment, after what it had done to the last prisoner who had inhabited this very cell, he wasn't going to die tonight. It was. What? He wasn't going to die tonight, it was. I don't know. For sure. The smallest tormentor undid the latch at the front of the cell while Felix watched. Then the creature reached in the plate and set it down right in front of him. This was his chance. No, you. You're also cool. You can both be cool, it's fine. There's enough cool to go around. Lunging for the creature's grotesque hand, Felix bit down into its bare flesh, producing a horribly bitter taste in his mouth. With his teeth sunken into its skin, Felix began digging at the hand with his fingernails. The tormentor let out an ear-piercing shriek, much different than the joyful shrieks of delight that it usually made when it was tormenting him. It withdrew its hand forcefully from the cell. Felix clamped its jaw down harder, and when the hand was withdrawn, he was yanked from the cell along with it. The beast thrust its hand backward, and the force caused Felix to release it, sending him slamming into the wall across from them. The creature's shriek drew the attention of the other tormentors, and they began howling violent death cries in unison, almost as if they shared some sort of hive mind and could feel the smallest tormentor's pain. One of them rushed to aid the smallest tormentor, but the other, the largest, turned its attention towards Felix. Scurrying away from it, he buried himself quickly out of sight. Thankfully, the largest tormentor didn't chase after him. Instead, it joined the other in aiding the wounded, giving Felix a chance to conceal himself better. From his hiding place, Felix peered out at them. He'd angered them, that much he knew for certain. But he'd failed to kill any of them. Still, the twisted smiles that they usually wore were nowhere in sight, which gave Felix the slightest bit of satisfaction. The wounded creature's death cries continued for a while, but gradually subsided. Although Felix hadn't managed to kill it, he seemed to have wounded it severely. The largest tormentor rose from the ground and swept the prison hall with its beady eyes. It was searching for Felix again. Retreating into his hiding place as far back as he could go, Felix concealed himself in the shadows of dusk. If the beast found him this time, there was no telling what unspeakable things it would do to him. Felix! The creature called out to him menacingly. Only this wasn't the same playful cat and mouse tone that it had called out to him earlier. No, this was much more sinister. The beast was angry. Felix! Its eyes swept the prison hall but came up with nothing. There was no trace of him. The prison was placed on lockdown while the tormentors searched nearly every inch for their captive. turning the prison hall completely upside down. Felix managed to stay one step ahead of them, or more precisely, one step behind them, quickly darting to each previous place they had checked to remain hidden. It gradually grew darker and darker within the prison hall, but even after night had fallen, their search continued for a few more fruitless hours. Eventually, when he was out of places to hide, Felix scampered upstairs into his captor's sleeping quarters. Here, he found an exorbitantly comfortable bed, much more comfortable than the hard floor that they had made him sleep on. They always saved the best things for themselves. He heard them take to the stairs shortly after him, and he quickly dove under the bed, tucking himself into the tightest corner he could fit in. When they reached the room themselves, the largest tormentor's malodorous bare feet stopped just in front of the bed, and Felix held his breath. The tormentor said something to the others, seemingly frustrated by the failed search. That was when the lights went out. The prison was cast into darkness, and my tea was cast into my mouth. That tea was getting dangerously close to getting cold. But it's fine. I drank it all. Safe. The tea is safe. And we can get back to the plot. Felix didn't know much about his alien captors. But if they had some sort of thermal night vision, then it would be easy to find him with the lights off. He waited for his inevitable capture. Yet, they never found him. Instead, the creatures climbed up into the bed, nearly collapsing the whole thing and crushing poor Felix under its weight. Felix stayed deathly still. Much to his disbelief, the creatures actually fell asleep not terribly long after. He started snoring loudly, producing truly guttural, monstrous noises. Still, Felix stayed hidden for several painstaking hours, fearing that this might be some sort of cleverly orchestrated ruse on their part to lure him out. When he was finally convinced that they were indeed asleep, he cautiously crawled out from under the bed and onto the floor of their sleeping quarters once more. Still, he had to see for himself to be sure. Climbing to the top of the bed, he stood over them for a moment. Felix had half a mind to kill these foul, ugly, vile, twisted creatures while they slept, but decided against it, in case attacking one woke the others. Instead, silently as he could, he climbed down off the bed and crept back downstairs. On the ground floor of the prison hall, Felix had never been outside of his cell at night until this very moment. For some reason, the disfigured shadows cast by the dark, towering shapes in the prison hall now frightened him. Maybe it was because Felix had become comfortable in his cell, knowing the shadows couldn't get to him. But now it seemed like they could. He crept over to the large front door of the prison as he listened intently for any signs of movement upstairs. Although there was still no sign of the tormentors, Felix knew that he probably didn't have much time. He needed to escape before morning. If he didn't, he was certainly done for. When he reached the prison's large front door, he stared up at it. There was a brass handle with a lock on the front that loomed high overhead. He decided that it wasn't likely that he would be able to reach the handle and turn it, let alone open the door. In fact, that was probably impossible. Felix glanced over at the large prison window besides the door. The brightest star in the night sky was shining brilliantly down at him through it. Only now, it seemed to be mocking him. The world beyond the prison walls seemed so close, yet so far away. That was when Felix had an idea. He'd climbed up to that window only once before. That was how he had stolen a glimpse of freedom that lay on the other side. However, on that singular occasion, when the tormentor spotted him perched on the windowsill, they roared angrily and raced towards him. Felix had seen the looks on their beady eyes as they'd done so. They seemed frantic. Maybe the window was a weak point of the prison? Maybe Felix could use it to escape. Climbing to the window, he perched himself on the windowsill. He could feel a warm breeze filtering through it, and could smell that familiar sweet aroma of the outside, tantalizing him. Freedom was within his grasp. Felix extended his hand out through the window, as if the world beyond the prison walls was drawing him to it. However, his hand never made it all the way out. Instead, it pressed up against a barbed wire-like grate, which covered the outside of the window. The tormentors must have taken extra precautions to keep him inside, especially considering the last time he climbed up to this point. Felix carefully reached his hand out to feel the grate. To his surprise, it was flexible and peculiarly It was thin. And it was thin. He wondered if he would be able to scratch or even bite his way through it. Although he quickly ruled out biting, since the material the grate was made out of seemed jagged. Instead, he scraped his fingernails against it, and a piece of it frayed off, creating a small hole in the patchwork. He scratched it again, and then again, and then again. Slowly but surely, more of the grate began to fray off, while also dulling and scraping his nails. Eventually, though, Felix had ripped a hole wide enough to almost fit his whole arm through. Pausing for a moment, he was curiously drawn to the window. Felix thrust his arm through the hole that he'd created and felt the warm breeze brush over him. He was almost there. However, there was still work to be done, and he slowly started to withdraw his arm from the hole in the barbed wire-like grate that he'd created. Going through the hole towards the outside was harmless, but as he feared, scratching against the grate left the frayed edges rather jagged, and while pulling his arm back, he could now feel the sharp edges scraping up against him. He feared that he would surely cut himself on them if he wasn't careful. Suddenly, though, he reached an impasse. Felix wasn't quite sure how it was possible, but it seemed as if his hand wasn't going to fit through the hole in the grate. The sharp edges were beginning to dig into his wrist. He slowly extended his arm again and twisted it slightly, thinking that maybe it was just the positioning of his arm that had created the conundrum, but the same thing happened again. He couldn't pull his arm back through the hole without tearing it on the jagged edges. "Okay, don't panic," Felix whispered reassuringly to himself, but he was already beginning to. He tried twisting his arm into another position, but it was hopeless. Realizing this, he saw that he only really had two options. One, he could stay stuck here until morning, at which point the tormentors would return, find him there helplessly stuck, and probably cook him into a stew. Or two, he was just going to have to bite the bullet and yank his arm through probably scratching it quite badly in the process. Felix took a deep breath and exhaled. He gazed through the window at the twinkling stars. The brightest one seemed to be encouraging him now. Here goes nothing, Felix mumbled. He took one last deep breath in and then tugged his arm back as quickly as he could. His hand slipped free of the hole, but the hole had claimed its prize, sending a sharp, coursing pain through Felix's arm. He unintentionally let out a cry of pain. Immediately, Felix threw his hand up to cover his mouth. As his arm throbbed, to his horror, he heard rumbling from the second floor of the prison, and then a light from up there flooding the staircase. The rumbling grew louder, and Felix turned his attention back to the window, trying to forget about his wounded arm. He began frantically scratching at the grate, the only thing standing between him and his freedom. The hole was no bigger than the size of his head when he heard the tormentors on the staircase. It didn't matter how much noise he made now. If he wasn't able to make the hole big enough to escape, he was a goner either way. The tormentors roared on the staircase, stomping heavily with each step as they drew nearer. Glancing back, Felix could see their disfigured shadows appear on the floor. The hole in the window grate wasn't nearly wide enough to slip through. Felix was out of time. He stopped scratching and gave one last yearnful look at the world beyond the window. The freedom that he was giving up. Felix glanced down at the prison floor, which was a significant drop from the windowsill. He determined that he was going to jump, and if it killed him, then so be it. At least it would be quick. If the tormentors got to him first, he would wish he was dead. He glanced over once more at the staircase, and when he saw the deformed, barefoot, the largest tormentor appear on the last step, he leapt from the windowsill. Felix came crashing down to the ground, landing hard on his feet among the shadows of the prison hall. The impact hurt. But unfortunately, it hadn't killed him. The tormentors were howling at one another when they appeared at the base of the staircase. Felix watched from the shadows as the eyes of their leader swept right past him and moved with horror to the open hole of the barbed wire grate that covered the window. The largest tormentor roared to the others, and then the three of them moved frantically to the large prison door. The leader threw the door open, and the others followed, the smallest of them trailing at the rear and leaving the prison door open behind it. Felix stared for a moment in disbelief at the unguarded, open door to the prison hall. They'd mistakenly thought they'd already escaped through the window, and they'd foolishly left the front door wide open. With hesitation, Felix made a break for the door and ran through it. The tormentors were scattered around outside, shrieking the name of their escaped captive into the night. Felix bolted past them, and just like that, he was free. Nope, wait. Death on Felix, oh no. Okay, so if he's a rabbit, he's about to meet a cat. Or a fox, could be a fox. I don't know. Because I don't know what part of the world has grating on their windows. It's normally like hot places in the world, isn't it? Like maybe like the South America kind of thing. Like a bug net. We don't have that around here, so I'm not sure who would. The brown thing. The only brown thing I can think of is the food that Felix has. And that didn't get eaten, that's for sure. Not sure about the other brown thing. Or if you meant the vet. But totally not vet. Wait, I need to quickly turn on the light in my room because it is very dark. 1 second. I imagine if it's the brown thing of the food, then yeah, that's probably just been left in his cell. Because he just bit the girl's hand instead. Look, I say the girl, it could be a little boy. I don't know. For some reason my brain's got like just two parents and a little girl in my head. That's my perception, I suppose. Who knows what the truth is? I'm not sure we'll ever find the truth with this until it's like right at the end, unless like the author has like, is there an afterword in this? Where the author's like, this is what I had in mind. This is the reality of what's going on. No. Oh, there is an afterword! Oh, we might get all our answers in the afterword. We've got quite a few chapters till we get there though. For now, we continue with Death on Four Legs. You tear me apart. 10 out of 10 if you know that song. Felix ran until he couldn't run anymore. The warm air and the sweet aroma of the outdoors breezed against his face as he bounded. Contrastingly, he could feel the cold, earthy morning dew on the grass beneath his feet. He felt invincible and weightless. This was freedom. He kept running until the tormentor's desperate shrieks had faded into the night behind him. They never saw him slip out of the prison door and dart out right behind their backs. For all intents and purposes, he'd made a clean getaway. When he was finally convinced that he was safe, he turned around to look back from where he'd come from. In the distance, he could see the prison existed in a compound of buildings, each as desolate as the last. They were all brightly lit, and their searchlights were scanning for him. But, thankfully, Felix was far away. Unlike he'd previously suspected, there was no fence surrounding the compound. The beasts must have thought that the defences they had Yes, the first blip I had. Do you reckon those searchlights he's talking about are like motion activated lights on that other people have on their houses and he's just run past them? Or would they be street lamps? Street lights? Who knows? Words can be hard. I have nailed the reading in this stream so far, so I've only like tripped over myself twice. That's pretty good so far. Normally I've done it at least 3 or 4 times by now. Where was I? The beasts must have thought that the defences they had put in place with the prison walls would be sufficient to keep him captive and subservient. But their hubris was ultimately their downfall. Exhausted, Felix collapsed to the ground and rolled onto his back. Above him, the twinkling stars seemed to be beaming down. Felix could have sworn that the brightest of them was shining even brighter out here, just for him. Gradually, the sharp pain in Felix's arm from the escape attempt through the window and the pain in his back and incisional scar from the terrible place he'd been to the day before crept back in. Oh wow, he's actually quite injured. I mean, I forgot, like, you know, he would have had major surgery, so that's never a fun recovery. Even still, he felt like it was all worth it in the end, because he got both experiences had gotten him here. Everything had a purpose. Without the waking nightmare of that awful place, Felix would never even dared to oppose the tormentor's authority by trying to escape. In time, all of his wounds would heal, and now Felix had all the time in the world. He smiled back up at the brightest star in the sky. The grass rustled beneath him as the warm breeze trickled through it. The night was otherwise still. Although he felt on top of the world, an eerie feeling of solitude set in. Everything was almost too still. Almost as if in answer to his apprehension, in the distance an unsettling noise, like a deep rumbling, sliced through the stillness of the night. Felix shot up in the grass. The rumbling grew louder and deeper with each passing second. Eyes fixed on the horizon, in the direction that the rumbling was coming from. He couldn't see the source of it, yet the intensity of it continued to build. Although he couldn't see it, he could sense that something was closing in on him, and it was closing in fast. Felix quickly abandoned licking his wounds, and his eyes darted around for a place to hide. But in the darkness of his unfamiliar surroundings, he couldn't see anywhere to go. Although he couldn't see it, something sounded like it was coming straight for him, almost like it knew exactly where he was. Felix was completely exposed. Getting up quickly, he started running again. At first, he thought that it was the tormentors, and that they had tracked and followed him here. However, when he saw what it really was, he quickly realized that it was something entirely new to be feared. One second, just snuffle a little bit. Snuffle complete. It first appeared a distance away, but it was barreling straight for him, like death on four legs, as the rumbling it produced intensified. Although Felix couldn't make out its face, he would remember those bulging, bright eyes for as long as he lived, which he thought might not be too much longer. He continued running as hard as he could, but it seemed like this new threat was on a collision course straight for him. The terrain changed beneath him, from soft grass to hard pavement, and Felix stumbled, tumbling head over heels right in front of the thing. With its prey in its sights, the thing locked its piercing bright eyes on Felix. Its gaping maw hung wide open, set to devour him whole. Sprawled out on the pavement, a small voice in the back of his head screamed at him, "Get up!" Obliging, Felix struggled to his feet. He had already made it this far. Whatever this thing was, he wasn't going to give it the satisfaction of ending him now. At the last possible second, Felix made one last mad dash for safety and lunged forward. He flew through the air and came crashing back down, landing right into the thick of a large bush. The bush's needles dug into him, and he cried out, but quickly threw his hands over his mouth to muffle his cries. The thing's momentum carried it right past the bush, and eventually the rumbling faded into the distance. The fact that we had little to no description of that thing makes me mad. Was it a fox? Was it a cat? What was it though? I was hoping we'd get more info on that thing. Maybe like a colour or something? And then that would help us figure out Felix, but apparently not. More mysteries in this book. Felix sat there, quietly shaking. To his surprise, the thing never turned around. But Felix didn't intend to stick around to see if it would. He crawled out from the bush and pulled out the needles that had pierced into his body, wincing at each. Eventually he gave up and let them remain there for the time being. Felix didn't know what that thing was, but whatever it was, He was clearly its prey, and it would likely return. He needed to keep moving. Marching on, Felix glanced over his shoulder neurotically every so often to make sure that thing wasn't following him. Finally, off in the distance up ahead, there was a glowing beacon of light that shot up into the sky. Felix was strangely drawn to it. As he drew closer to the light, he began to see the outline of tremendous, towering buildings, and the sweet aroma of the outside began to sour. Still, he continued towards the place curiously. The beacon of light seemed to be emanating from here, and although he couldn't fathom what it was that he had stumbled upon, he found that the place was incredibly well illuminated, even at this hour of night, and he thought that it resembled some sort of advanced futuristic alien civilization. The smell soon became overwhelmingly rancid when he was just on the outskirts of this strange place. Underneath a glowing neon-lighted sign marked with strange alien symbols, Felix saw a large metal bin, and he knew where the rancid stench had been coming from. It was a dumpster filled to the brim with rotten garbage. A tin can suddenly flew out from the dumpster and landed just beside him. Felix ducked and scurried away, remaining in the shadows, but watched the bin curiously. Several more tin cans and other assorted garbage flew out the bin. Do you think there's going to be trash pandas in the trash? Towards him, Felix narrowly dodged all of it. After the assault had ceased, Felix could hear indistinct mumbling coming from inside the dumpster. A shadowy figure popped a head out of the bin, and then its body emerged next, mumbling agitatedly to itself. Felix couldn't make out the entire figure, but when its silhouette landed on the ground under the glow of the neon light, he noticed that the outline of the figure's shadowy shape was nearly identical to his own. Is Felix a trash panda? Is he a raccoon? Oh my god! I hope so! Felix the trash panda. It has occurred to me while reading this that this book is a really good example of something that needs to stay a book. This wouldn't work in any other kind of media, because every other kind of media is visual in a way. So it would give away what Felix is. Like, you could maybe do like a first person game or something like that. But no, this book could never be animated. This book could never have a movie because that doesn't work. But yes, from now on, Felix is a trash panda. So why were they keeping a trash panda? If Felix, we're going on this theory now. Felix is a trash panda, and I guess maybe the tormentors, they maybe rescue injured trash pandas, and maybe that's why. Or maybe like his trash pan. We did have that dream sequence about his mum. How his mum like left him behind. So I guess they found this baby trash panda and they were like, let's keep this baby trash panda. He'll be fine. Obviously, trash pandas are totally domesticated and are absolutely fine with staying indoors all the time. Which they are not. I don't know the intricacies of trash pandas, but if animals have not been traditionally domesticated, then they don't normally take well to domestications. So that would explain a lot. If Felix is, I didn't think we'd get a big hint like this. Yeah, Felix the trash panda. We know now. I am Felix the trash panda. All who hear my name shall fear me. Yes, yes, they will. Oh, sweet trash panda. Chapter 8: The Colony. Oh, we're gonna go to the colony of trash pandas. As the figure emerged further into the light, Felix decided that the figure was exactly like him. In captivity, Felix had feared that he'd been the last of his kind, but here, in the flesh, was another. Without giving it a second thought, he called out to the figure. "Hello, friend!" Felix shouted. The figure stopped, brushing garbage off himself and mumbling, and faced Felix's direction. Felix began to walk forward into the light towards him, finally able to make out his face in the glow of the neon light. He looked just like Felix. That much was sure. Only dingier, which made him look much rougher than Felix. His light brown hair was powdered with a permanent layer of dust. "Who are you?" the figure asked. The voice struck Felix, and he froze in his tracks. It wasn't necessarily the way in which he spoke, but the fact alone that Felix could understand the words he had said caused Felix to freeze. "I'm Felix," he answered. The figure took a step towards him. "I don't think I've seen you around here before, Felix," he said. "That's because I'm not from around here," Felix replied. "You're not?" the figure asked. "Then where are you from?" Felix was hesitant. Obviously, he'd just escaped from the tormentors, who had kept him imprisoned for as long as he could remember. Telling this stranger that he was now a wanted fugitive probably wasn't the best idea. Still, the figure in front of him looked nothing like a tormentor. In fact, since he looked just like Felix, Felix had immediately felt like he could trust him. He was reserved. "Some place else," Felix answered vaguely. The figure took a few more steps towards him. As he drew closer, Felix could see how much bigger he was than himself. So is Felix a baby still? Felix is a baby. Baby trash panda. His eyes were narrowed, locked on Felix curiously as Felix smiled up at him as wide as he could, trying to make the best first impression. Finally, the figure smiled back at him, revealing an enormous canine tooth on one side of his mouth. Although maybe it looked so enormous because on the other side of his mouth was a gap where the other canine had either broken off or fallen out. "Well, Felix from someplace else," he said. "Welcome to scenic Metropolis." He spread his arms apart as if presenting the entirety of this strange place to Felix. A half grin of mild amusement spread across his face, as if to suggest he was being entirely facetious about the whole scenic part. But then he seemed to grow entirely bored with the whole thing a moment later, as the expression on his face went blank and he grunted, "Come with me," he finished, and then began to turn away. "Where are we going?" Felix asked. "There's someone that you should meet." Felix followed close behind as his new companion led him into the thick of the place called Metropolis. As in where Superman lives. That's Metropolis, right? This a DC crossover. They traversed down a narrow alley lit up under more brightly coloured neon signs. In vibrant shades of blues, purples, pinks, yellows and greens, each lit up the form of weird alien markings. The signs themselves were fixed to the side of towering buildings made up of metal, like edifices that reached up so impossibly high that they seemed to touch the night sky until they were swallowed up by the blackness. Felix was mesmerized by it all. However, it wasn't just the sight of the buildings alone which intrigued him. There was something else too. A strange sense of familiarity lingered in the back of Felix's mind, until a revelation struck him all at once. This was the same labyrinth, or at least very similar to the one where he'd followed the sounds of his mother's voice down in his dreams. The maze of mirrors, the place where she'd abandoned him. Felix gazed upon the massive monolithic buildings of Metropolis that surrounded him in disbelief. It looked very much like the place, but that much was sure. But there were some distinct differences as well. Namely, this place wasn't made entirely of mirrors. Felix shrugged off the thought as he wrote the similarities off as mere coincidence and let it slip away. There was no way that a place like that could even exist. He was sure that the place in his dreams was nothing more than that. In the shadows of the looming buildings, Felix noticed another figure that looked just like him, another of his kind, hacking into a gutter. Then there were more of them that walked past in the opposite direction, trudging along. They all looked ragged and angry. Felix inched closer to the figure that he was following, overwhelmed by the sudden contradiction to his previously held existential beliefs. Sorry. What's your name? That's Felix. What's your name? Felix asked, trying to calm his nerves by talking. Me friends call me Fang. Felix remembered the enormous canine tooth on one side of his mouth, and figured that was how he earned his name. What does someone call you if they're not your friend? Felix asked. Fang chuckled. Thank you. Still Fang, he said. How many of us are there, Fang? Felix asked, eyeing the run-down others of their kind that passed by. Us? Fang repeated. Yeah, Felix said and gestured to those passing by them. Making eye contact with one, he tried smiling at him. A scowl met his friendly gesture in return, and Felix slunk away. Too many, Fang said coldly, if you ask me. And we built all of this? Felix asked, still entranced by the massive buildings that surrounded them. Fang turned back to him with a raised eyebrow. You're joking, right? He scoffed. Before Felix could say that he wasn't, someone jumped out at them from around the corner. Fang! This new figure cried excitedly. Man, am I glad to see you. I've been looking everywhere for you. He was barely stopping to breathe. When he finally did, he noticed Felix standing there. Who's that you have with you? This is Felix, Fang answered calmly. Felix, this is my associate Damien. Why does it feel like they're a mafia? I don't know. Why is my model doing that? My eye is going twitchy. It's fine. Everything's fine. But yeah, this is starting to feel like mafia of trash pandas. Why does that feel like a stereotypical thing? I don't know. Damien had a tangled rat's nest of blonde hair. It may have been white, but like Felix's, but it was much dirtier and knotted in places, like he hadn't cleaned himself for weeks. He was so wide-eyed that Felix was positive that he wasn't blinking. Are you taking him to see Nikolai? Yeah, okay, this is mafia. These are mafia names if I've ever heard them. I'm sorry for anyone who has these names, but when you have these names together, this makes mafia names. Are you taking him to see Nikolai? Damien asked. Spastic. That's not a wonderful word choice. He's newer, Fang replied. Damien glanced down at Felix and then back at Fang. I was on my way to see him too. Yeah, I was, he said. I'll go with you. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll go with you. I like Damien. Fang stared at him curiously for a moment. Have you been getting on the stuff again? He asked. Oh no, that's why he sees the way he is. No, Damien insisted. I'm off it. I'm off it. I swear. Fang's gaze remained on him before he eventually turned away and back towards Felix. Alright, let's keep going, he said. Damien fell in line behind them, but Felix couldn't help but notice that he was twitching uncontrollably, creeping closer to Fang. Felix kept his voice barely above a whisper. What's wrong with him? He asked, motioning to the new member of their party. Fang glanced back to Damien and shook his head. He's got a problem, he said, and continued. Before much longer, Fang stopped, and there was a small crack in between the large metal walls of the alleyway that Fang had stopped in front of, that formed a sort of tunnel entrance. Here we are, he said, and gestured towards the tunnel. You want me to go through there? Felix asked. Fang nodded, and Felix felt like he could trust him, so he walked through the crack. The tunnel was dark, but Felix could make out the faint glow of dim violet light on the other side. He crawled into the light until he finally emerged into a small room, surrounded on all sides by solid metal walls. The room was filled with shiny little trinkets and treasures, but also scattered trash littered around. At the center of the room, lording over it all, was a discerning eye, his back turned to Felix. I'm gonna read that again. One second. With a discerning eye, not a I knew I'd missed something. I knew that didn't make sense. At the center of the room, lording over it all with a discerning eye. Nope, wait. His back turned to Felix was an enormous shadowy figure with jet black hair that was slicked down and back. He was almost even larger than Fang and Damien combined, and much larger than Felix, a true alpha. Felix stood still by the entrance of the room. Fang and Damien entered through the tunnel and stood beside him. Nikolai, brought you someone to meet, Fang began. Nikolai cocked his head to one side, and Felix noticed the large scar across his face, covering one eye and sealing it completely shut. On the same side, he was also missing half of his ear. Well. Here's where I try not to do any kind of racist accent. Well. And Nikolai began in a deep baritone. Maybe I should try. Well. Sorry, I need to get a voice change sorted. Fang gently encouraged Felix to step forwards by pushing him from behind. Oh no. Who do we have here? Nikolai asked. Felix. Felix stuttered nervously. Nikolai turned completely to face him. When he did, Felix could have sworn that he noticed a slight look of recognition pass over his face, but then fade as quickly as it had appeared. Do I know you from somewhere? Nikolai asked, trying to recapture something that felt like it was on the tip of his tongue. Felix shook his head. He could feel that he was visibly shaking. Don't be nervous, little one, Nikolai said with a chuckle. Yeah! Don't be a scaredy cat! Damien teased and laughed along with him. Nikolai passed him a wicked glance, and Damien was quickly silenced. Felix turned back to Fang, who nodded at him, and Felix took a few steps forward. If I don't know you from somewhere, then you must not be from around here, Nikolai said and raised a curious eyebrow towards him. He's not, Fang informed him. Nikolai glanced over the Fang with a frighteningly intense stare. Fang looked down at his feet. I was not talking to you, I was talking to the boy. Felix swallowed a lump in his throat. I'm not from around here, he answered for himself. Well then, allow me to be among the first to welcome you to the colony of Metropolis, Nikolai said, where, if you don't mind me asking, of course, are you from? He seemed pleasant enough, at least when he was talking to Felix, but there was something beneath the surface of pleasantness that seemed unsettling. Felix noticed it in his quick glances to Fang and Damien, and the way they seemed to cower away whenever he shot them those glances. Someplace else? Felix replied once more. Nikolai stared at him for a lingering moment, and then his lips curled into a smile. It's always nice to see a new face, he said. Walking towards Felix, he closed the distance in only a couple of monstrous steps. Nikolai was certainly a tremendous figure. He slung his massive arm around the back of Damien's head, resting a hand on his shoulder. I can tell you're not from around here, Nikolai said. Do you know how? Felix rattled his head back and forth. You're too clean, Nikolai said, and then chuckled. In fact, you don't look like you've ever been outside before. Now, I'll ask you this one more time, and I expect you to answer truthfully. He spoke playfully, and his tone danced around almost melodically, and I am not reading it that way, so I apologize. But his next words were direct and deliberate. Where are you from? Felix felt a shiver creep up his spine. Before tonight, I was a prisoner, he said. Nikolai turned to Fang and Damien. Do you hear that, boys? We got a real outlaw on our hands. He started laughing heartily and the others joined in, although Felix could tell that they did so apprehensively. It's true, Felix insisted, slightly embarrassed. The tormentors kept me locked in a cell. They tormented me for their own enjoyment, and when I realized that they were going to eat me, I knew I had to escape. So I climbed up onto the prison window, but when they came downstairs, I was forced to abandon it. Fortunately, they left the front door of the prison wide open, and I just slipped out behind them. Nikolai stopped laughing, and the others followed suit. He reached his other arm over and pinched Felix's lips together tightly, and his hand as Felix tried to continue nervously talking through his clamped mouth. That's quite enough of that, Nikolai said. Felix clammed up and stared at the massive figure that was looming threateningly over him. We've got rules around here, Nikolai continued. His grip tightened around the back of Felix's neck, and his hand dug into his shoulder. Felix tried to shrug away, but it was no use. My associates here enforce those rules, Nikolai said, and motioned to Fang and Damien. I make those rules. For some reason, Felix half expected him to break out into a theatrical song performance about how he was king of the garbage or something like that. Oh my god, yes, just like some kind of like Ratican moment. Oh, that would be wonderful. Where's the lyrics? Where's the song reading now? But Nikolai's grip became tighter with every movement. Trash Panda King! Yes, indeed. You see, Nikolai continued, the colony is mine. Nobody gets in or out unless I decide that they do. Are you following me so far? Felix nodded gravely. Good, Nikolai said with a grin. Unfortunately for you, little Felix, the colony is already at capacity. We've got enough mouths to feed here as it is. So if you want to stay, you're going to need to prove your worth. Still with me? Felix nodded again. The fear that he had made a grave mistake in trusting fact. This is how it's going to go. Come tomorrow night. You're going to bring me 3 great fowl. He held up 3 of his fingers and counted them off, pausing for a moment to glare down at Felix, to let him know that he meant business. Although there was no misinterpreting that. We can discuss your quota later. Consider the first 3 great fowl as a gracious gift from you to me for allowing you to even earn your place in the colony. They'll be my dinner tomorrow. He furrowed his eyebrows at his face suddenly, and his face suddenly looked villainous. All the while, his grin never faded, but it now took on a much more menacing tone. Or at least, you are going to be my dinner tomorrow. Do I make myself clear? Felix gulped. He had fled from the tormentors only to wind up in the clutches of someone else who wanted to eat him. Do I make myself clear? Nikolai roared. Felix bobbed his head up and down. Good, Nikolai said, finally relaxing his grip on Felix's shoulders and patting him hard on the back. You know, I believe this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Oh, the cliches! The villainous cliches! I love it. It's great. Felix wanted to decline his thoughtful offer of becoming friends, but he was too scared to speak. Well, Nikolai continued again, you'd better get going. After all, you wouldn't want to disappoint me. Oh, and there is one more thing, Felix. You can try to run away, but I wouldn't recommend it. My associates and I love it when they try to run. He patted Felix hard on the back again, and Felix fell forward onto the ground. Damien began chuckling. Felix lifted his head toward Fang, who was callously picking something from behind his large canine tooth. He obviously wasn't going to help him. Turning to the dark tunnel that he'd entered from, Felix ran for it. They didn't try to stop him as he disappeared into it. I'll be waiting, Nikolai called out in a fit of laughter behind them. His laughter gradually faded into the distance, but Felix was almost sure that he could hear the start of a big, show-stopping musical production behind him. I don't care to question how Felix knows about show-stopping musical productions, but good lord, is he right? Nikolai, the trash panda king. He will make you go after birds. He says great foul, so I can't help but think that he's talking about like KFC buckets. Is he talking like fried chicken from a bin? Or is he actually gonna have to hunt birds? I don't know. Nikolai the trash king, he'll give you all the orders. He'll be a villainous cliche and you will shit your pants. Yay! That'll do. That'll do. Oh, that's a lot of fun. And have a quick drink before we do some more. I haven't been updating my chapters. Who told? No one told me that I haven't been updating my chapter things. Chapter 6. I'm on chapter 9 now. That's 3 chapters I forgot. God damn it. Brain. I've just been enjoying this too much. It's a good story so far. Oh, Riley. Are we gonna get a friend? This is the friendo, I 100% guessing we're getting a friend, because there's no way Felix is surviving this by himself. He's too much of a baba. But now the baba's gonna be in the mafia. Oh, okay. Chapter 9. Darting out from the tunnel and back into the narrow alley, Felix nearly collided with another of his kind on the way out. Out of the way! They hissed. Felix took off, away from the menacing figure. He zigzagged past several of them, just narrowly avoiding each as they slumped their way through the alleyway, eyeing him disgustedly as he passed. Although they looked just like him, Felix felt incredibly out of place among them. Each of them looked worn down and angry. Most looked like they wanted to hurt him. Wait a minute, I need to blow my nose! Done. Right. Once he put enough distance between himself and Nikolai and his henchmen, he turned back to make sure that they weren't chasing after him. Still, running forward while looking behind him, he collided with one of his kind. The impact sent Felix tumbling backwards to the ground. Hey, watch it, kid! The disgruntled figure called out. Slightly disorientated from the collision, Felix quickly came back to his senses and crawled away backward. Please don't eat me, he cried out. The figure was struggling to his own feet, rubbing his head of flaming red hair. Eat you? The figure repeated. And why would I do that? You don't look very tasty to me. In fact, you look kind of scrawny. Felix began stuttering out whatever came to his mind first. The guy back there, he began. He said he was going to eat me, and then there was the thing, and the bulging eyes, and was trying to eat me, and the tormentors that were going to try and eat me. I'm pretty sure everything wants to eat me. Are you alright? The figure asked. Did you hit your head or something? Felix rubbed his head, which was admittedly sore from the collision. Yeah, I think so, he said. Well, I would suggest you get over it quickly. You shouldn't stay here and keep yammering for too long. You don't want to let Nikolai catch you goofing off. Yeah, you're with Nikolai? Felix asked. The figure stared down at him for a moment. You're not from around here, are you? He asked suspiciously. Felix wondered how everyone seemed to pick up on it so easily. Nikolai said it was because he looked less grimy. Maybe that made him look easier to take advantage of. Whatever the case, the fact remained that obviously he wasn't from around here. Although the last time he'd revealed that information to Nikolai, it had nearly gotten him eaten. Of course I'm from around here, Felix assured him. Right, the figure replied skeptically. And I'm queen of the colony. You're queen of the colony? Felix repeated. Oh, sweetie. Oh, sweet baby. The figure shook his head unamusedly. You must have hit your head, he mumbled as he began to turn away, hoisting himself up into a garbage bin that was against the wall of the alley. Felix couldn't help but appreciate the fact that he seemed a little less defeated and angry than the rest of those of his kind he'd encountered so far. Their chance meeting was perhaps a twist of fate. My name's Felix, he said. You still here? The figure asked as he began rummaging around in the dumpster. Yeah, Felix answered. Where else am I supposed to go? Not my problem, kid. Don't call me kid, Felix said. My name's Felix, and I realize I've started voicing him younger and younger now. Because even if he's not a kid right now, he's incredibly naive. So, younger voices it is. Felix, the figure repeated, poking his head out the dumpster. What a ridiculous name. Felix wondered what was so ridiculous about it as the figure resumed rummaging around in the dumpster with his back turned. Who are you? Felix asked. Doesn't matter. What's your name? Felix tried. The figure sighed and turned to face him. He could tell that he wasn't going to be rid of Felix that easily. Riley, he finally answered. Now, would you just go already? He resumed his rummaging, but Felix remained there. How is Felix any more ridiculous of a name than Riley? Blunt as a bloody brick, isn't he? Riley stopped again and turned back frustratedly. Because it is, he answered. Do you really have nothing better to do? Should I? Felix asked. You should probably be trying to find enough food to feed yourself and meet your quota, Riley said. My quota? Felix asked. Nikolai had mentioned a quota earlier, right before he threatened to eat him. What is it with you? Riley asked. You can't possibly have hit your head that hard. Glancing over at Felix, he could instantly sense the hurt and confusion behind his big blue eyes. He was like a small child lost in a big world. Riley softened a little. And we got confused by the sudden perspective change for a paragraph. Look, he began. I don't know where you came from, or how you got here. And frankly, I don't have time to care. The fact of the matter is that if you're gonna survive out here, you're gonna need enough food for yourself to live off, and enough food to give to Nikolai to meet your quota. Those are the rules here. Why would I give my food to Nikolai? Because, Riley said, as if this alone was sufficient enough answer. Because why? Felix asked, unsatisfied. Because the colony because the colony is his. And those are the rules. If you don't like them, maybe you should take it up with him. Felix shuddered at the thought of ever having to see Nikolai again. Okay, Felix replied in understanding. So where do I find food? These days? Riley asked. The garbage, mostly. Turning back around, he began rummaging through the dumpster once more. Felix walked over to the same dumpster and hopped into it beside him. Riley stopped suddenly and turned towards him. What do you think you're doing? He asked. Rummaging for food, Felix answered, like you told me to. I didn't mean here, Riley cried, throwing his hands up in frustration. How do you expect us both to find food in the same bin? Felix met Riley's fierce gaze, and tears began to well in his eyes. You know what? Riley decided, turning away from the obviously dejected Felix in front of him. Never mind. You can have this one. I'll go somewhere else. Hopping out of the dumpster, Riley began to walk away, mumbling words that Felix didn't recognize under his breath. Swear words, maybe? God, what a Felix watched from the dumpster. He didn't know how he was ever going to survive out here on his own, when seemingly everything around him wanted to eat him. If he was going to survive, having a friend was the best chance of survival. Riley was his best, maybe even only chance of having a friend. Climbing out of the dumpster himself, Felix began trailing his new friend. That's annoying. Felix. I told you to leave you alone. They had only gone a few feet before Riley realized he was being followed and turned around. Now you're following me? He asked, obviously unaware of the arrangement Felix had made for both of them. Felix stared up at him. Please, sir. Will you be my friend? Groaning frustratedly, Riley became stern. Listen, he began. You can't follow me. Why not? Because! Riley cried. He struggled to come up with a good explanation, before finally erupting with frustration. Come tomorrow. I'm gone. Out of here. See you later. And that's all I want for my last night is some peace and quiet. Is that too much to ask? His eyes widened suddenly, and he covered his mouth, as if he'd just blurted an enormous secret, and he then instantly regretted it. You're getting out of here? Felix repeated. The cat was out of the bag now. No, Riley tried. But you just said that come tomorrow you're gone, Felix reminded him. Would you be quiet? Riley pleaded in a harsh whisper. He glanced around to make sure that nobody heard them. Out of here. See you later. Felix continued, but was interrupted by Riley putting a hand over his mouth. Felix continued to try babble through it. Felix, sweetie, learn to close your mouth. I guess he's excited. He's never had people to talk to before. So now he's just talking too much. Oh, sweetie pie. Sweetie pie. Alright, fine, yes, Riley admitted. If for no other reason to stop Felix's rambling. I'm getting out of Metropolis tomorrow night and leaving behind this wretched colony for good. So, even if I wanted to help you, which I don't, I can't. If you thought I was going to help you, then you're sadly mistaken, kid. Felix shook himself loose from Riley's grasp. Don't call me kid, he said again. What's wrong with kid? Riley asked. It's degrading, Felix answered. It makes me sound young and naive, like I'm inferior to you or overly reliant. You mean that's exact description of what you are at the moment, Felix? You are inferior and over-reliant, Riley declared. Listen, if you want help, you're going to need to find it somewhere else. Turning and storming away, he mumbled more unfamiliar words under his breath. Fucking shit. Felix stood there for a moment, remembering the troubled look on Riley's face when he'd blurted out that he was leaving. Nikolai's words echoed in his ears. Nobody gets in or out unless I decide they do. Does Nikolai know you're leaving? Felix called after him. Oh, you gotta go? Yes, much savage. I'm glad you had fun. I'm glad you were here. Thanks for popping in while you can. I hope you have a good day. Goodbye. This is actually kind of intense, isn't it? It's a little cliche, but I'm in on it. I am so in on it. Riley stopped dead in his tracks and pivoted slowly to face him. His fiery stare alone made Felix immediately regret having asked the question. But he needed to stand firm. Someone's gonna find a gun in one of these dumpsters somewhere. Then no one will question Nikolai. Are you gonna tell him? Riley asked coldly. Of course, Felix didn't intend to, because he never wanted to see Nikolai again. However, with this information, Felix thought he could make Riley do whatever he— What a little shit! Whatever he wanted, which included taking Felix with him. After all, even though Felix was among his own kind, he knew he didn't belong here. He saw it on the faces of all the others he'd walked past in the alleyway. Riley was the only one among them that didn't look like he wanted to hurt him. At least initially. Right now, Riley looked like he was ruffled and might snap at any minute. Not if you take me with you, Felix answered. Riley studied Felix intently for a moment. I can't afford to be responsible for myself and somebody else. Please, Felix asked. I'll stay out of the way, I promise. Riley shook his head. I can't, he replied. It seemed like a harder decision. It seemed like a harder decision to make than he was letting on. Almost like he was disheartened that he couldn't. Felix frowned. Well then, I guess I'll just have to tell Nikolai about your little trip. Riley's expression quickly went from disheartened to enraged. So, he began, you're gonna blackmail me? What's blackmail? Felix! Felix, you little shit! What's blackmail? I am an innocent baby. What you're doing to me right now? I'm not blackmailing you, Felix said. I'm just threatening to expose a secret of yours, and in return, you'll do what I want, so that I don't expose it. That's blackmail! It is? Felix asked. Riley's nostrils flared as he huffed and puffed, struggling to calm himself. In his mind, he had two options. He could take Felix with him, or he could kill him. Felix has the making of it at the moment, doesn't he? Straight to fucking blackmail. He doesn't even know what it is. He could be a good boss. Felix was thinking the same thing, but something told him that if Riley hadn't killed him already, he wasn't going to. Ugh, fine, Riley said, flailing his hands up in the air in defeat. You can tag along, but let's get one thing straight. I am not your babysitter. And you are not my problem. Felix nodded his head in understanding. It's every man for himself out there, Riley continued. If you slow me down, I'm leaving you behind. Duly noted. I mean it, Riley said insistently. If it comes between leaving you to die or coming back for you, I'm gonna let you die. Alright, Felix cried. I get it. Still, although he was being so insistent, something about Riley made Felix unsure if he really meant it or not. Was he trying to convince Felix or himself? Riley groaned when the realization set in of what he'd just signed himself up for. Oh. What a strange dance I just did. Oh no, Riley, you just signed yourself up to be a dad. Welcome to fatherhood. Get everything valuable that you own together, but pack light, he said. Remember, if you slow me down, I'm leaving you behind. How could I forget? We meet back here tomorrow at dusk, Riley declared, and then turned away and began walking off. Wait! Felix called out. I don't have anything valuable! Riley didn't turn back around and continued off into the distance before disappearing into the shadowy corners of this strange place. Okay, this story has popped off. I really was curious what in the world was gonna happen. Because obviously the concept of him being some kind of animal kept by a human family, I didn't think that was gonna carry on for very long. I mean, there's only so much you can do with the whole, oh no, I'm trapped. And then things can go two ways when stories like that get out of the entrapment. It can either it can fall off and not generally be half as interesting anymore, or it can do this and just becoming just pop off. We got a mafia of trash panda. I can't believe he's a trash panda. Oh, this is wonderful. This is a wonderful, wonderful book. Oh, we are on chapter 10. I could probably get one more in, I reckon. Need to make up for my my lateness today. Get one more chapter in. Yeah. I wish it told me the pages so that I could like estimate how long that chapter's gonna take. But hey ho, we will read. Trash Buyer acquires his manly man card by becoming a mafia boss. Yes, or a mafia enforcer, because I feel like Fang and Damien have their manly men cards too. And now Riley and Felix are going to go off to another town and make a different colony, one which Felix will rule and Riley will enforce. There are 3 things you need to avoid if you want to survive. Riley began, holding up 3 fingers, in case Felix needed assistance, and counting them off. Also the tone shift now. Like, it was kind of horror-y at the start with the tormentors and everything, and now I feel like it's pretty kind of comedic. Oh yeah, Riley does kind of have that death flagginess, doesn't he? It feels like that dad boy kind of theme that people get. And the mentor character, or the dad, will sometimes go. We pray not. Although there has been a lot of cliches since we left. And suddenly it's a comedy, so who knows? Comedy and tragedy is a fine line. Twilight had begun to fall as Felix and Riley stood face to face with one another in front of the dumpster where they had met the night before. To be honest, Felix was a bit surprised that Riley had returned at all. But since he was lording his blackmail over him, he was almost certain that he would. Riley for the win. we pray for Riley's safety then. Riley had spent the day making last-minute preparations for the journey, while Felix had been heading out inside. While Felix had been hiding out inside of the dumpster where they had met. After Riley had left him for the night, Felix quickly realized that he was completely alone. Finding yourself alone in a world beyond the prison walls. This place called Metropolis was a frightening revelation. Although he was safely tucked away in the dumpster, he could hear unfamiliar sounds and strange voices just beyond it that tormented him throughout the day. They sounded like the tormentors, but Felix was sure he had managed to put enough space between himself and those brutes. He figured it was just his imagination playing tricks on him, but even so, he had been too scared to even look until Riley returned the following evening and found him cowering right where he had left him. sweet Felix. Only 3? Felix asked. He was convinced there were countless more horrors that needed to be wary of than that. Well, Riley continued, of course there are more than that, but we'll start with 3. Wouldn't want to overwhelm you. Right, so, number 1. He counted off his first finger before Felix interrupted. Why don't you just tell me all of them then? The absolute comedy of these two together is perfect. Locking his jaw, Riley gritted his teeth in frustration. They hadn't even begun their journey yet, and Felix was already irritating him to no end. Listen, he began again. You asked for my help. Do you want to survive or not? Felix nodded. Right, Riley continued. Number 1, first and foremost. If we happen to run into him again, we want to avoid Nikolai at all costs, and his lackeys for that matter. Fang and Damien? Felix asked. Those are the ones, Riley said, an obvious hint of annoyance behind his tone. Number 2, he continued. The other with the metal arm. The other with the metal arm? Felix repeated. Or just metal arm for short, Riley said. That sounds made up. Well, it's not, Riley assured him, rather curtly. It's very real. As a matter of fact, stay clear of the others. Some of them are alright, but the majority of them are not friends. Others? Felix interrupted once more. Riley buried his face in his hands and started rubbing his eyes. Oh, brother, he mumbled. You've got a lot to learn. Teach me, Felix said. They got long necks and nearly hairless bodies and pale, clammy skin, Riley said. They're unmistakable. Throwing his hands up in the air, he began flailing his arms and legs around to imitate the others' gangly movements. Felix knew from that description the alien creatures that Riley was referring to. He knew them all too well. You mean the tormentors, Felix said. Even the word alone made his skin crawl. The what? Riley asked. No, I mean the others. He knew he had a different name for them, but Felix knew they were the one and the same. After all, Felix had come up with the tormentors, with the name tormentors while being held in captivity all on his own. Regardless, it didn't matter what they were called. What did matter was that even Riley was threatened by them. Tales of their wickedness have spread even to this place. Still, Felix wondered if Riley knew just what those foul creatures were fully capable of. Can I continue? Riley asked, somewhat sarcastically. Felix nodded. Last but not least, Riley began, hesitantly once more, as if he was expecting another interruption or question any moment. Number 3, the monsters. The monsters? Felix repeated ominously. Riley nodded. Yeah, he answered, with the bulging bright eyes. Felix remembered his own encounter with such a quadrupedal creature shortly after he first escaped. It had nearly eaten him whole. The nightmare would likely haunt him for many nights to come. I saw one of them. Great, Riley said. Can I finish? Felix nodded. Never, and I repeat, never let one of them get you out in the open, Riley said, or else they will not hesitate to devour you alive. I've seen them take out another or one or two now and then. Oh God, what are they then? So that it can't be a cat or a fox if they've seen them. It's like a bear? Oh, I don't know. Or is it like a mountain lion or something? Oh, I don't know. They hunt indiscriminately for them. Anything and everything is a meal. Wow. Rats? You've seen rats take it? Oh, it could be a rat, I guess. It doesn't have to be anything big to take out another. By take out another, he might mean that they've been chased off rather than killed, I guess. That is a good shout. His eyes seem to glaze over. Something on the same level of evil as the tormentors, or even worse, was certainly something to be feared. And Felix hoped that he wouldn't have to come across such a creature ever again for as long as he lived. Luckily for us, though, Riley continued, shuddering himself back to reality, the monsters tend to swarm around heavily populated areas like Metropolis. So for that reason, we'll be travelling mostly under the cover of the glowwood forest that surrounds it. A bipedal creature. Is it a dog? Is it a dog? And his idea of the others being taken out by them is when a dog kind of like jumps on a person and like you fall down because it's a big dog. It could just be a dog. The glowwood forest? Felix asked. Yes! Riley cried. Can I please get through this without the constant interruptions or having to explain every single little thing to you? Poor Riley. Felix climbed up and nodded for him to continue. Riley took a long breath in and then let it out slowly to compose himself. Couple of ground rules before we begin, he said. We never travel during the day, only at night. It's true, we couldn't figure out what Felix was, so unless we get another hint, we are purely speculating. We have our detective hats on right now. And we still don't even know if Trash Panda is correct, but Trash Panda seems to be the best bet. Because, I mean, it's not the... we just saw a mammal in the trash, and that's what I thought. But you are right, they could be rats too, which could make the yeah, it's not confirmed. We just assumed they're trash pandas. But your point on rats is a good thing. They could be rats as well, and it could be that because rats are very intelligent as well, from what I know. And you can have a white rat. And Felix is white. And then the bipedal four-legged creatures could be cats. I don't know. That could be why Felix also went mad, because you're not supposed to keep rats on their own. That's true. That's true. Curious. We still need confirmation on things, but my brain is still imagining trash pandas right now because it's cute. I find trash pandas cuter than rats, so far my imagination is filling in trash pandas. Makes sense, Felix said. Obviously, night was best to avoid being seen. There were so many things to be afraid of in the dark, but they were probably even more of a threat in the daytime. Especially if they could see two travelers. It was best to stay hidden as much as possible while traveling. Exactly, the image of the trash panda mafia boss king is the best, and especially with its mention of like, oh, and he could break out into song any moment. I want to see that. I need to see the mafia king trash panda Disney song. Oh, that'd be great. Be prepared for Nikolai to get you. Anyway, yeah. Next, don't follow too closely behind me or it'll attract too much attention. Riley continued. We need to space out, got it? Felix nodded again. And I can't stress this one enough, Riley said. But please, try to keep the rambling to a minimum. This one seemed more like a personal request than the ground rule, and yet he somehow already sounded completely exhausted by Felix. Still, Felix wondered how flexible he was around it. "Is that it?" Felix asked. "For now," he said. "I didn't plan to have company for this trip, so I'm making it up as I go. The last ground rule is that if I think of any other ground rules, they also apply. Fair?" It wasn't really, Felix thought, but he nodded affirmatively, regardless. "All right," Riley said and turned away. "Now let's get moving. We're burning moonlight." In the time Riley had spent establishing boundaries and offering free advice, the sun had dipped completely below the horizon. Above them, they only had the stars to light their way. Felix's eyes found the familiar brightest star among them, and he nodded up to it resolutely. Riley began moving first, but he'd barely taken 2 steps forward when a voice rang out to the 2 travelers through the darkness. It startled Felix, but it seemed to scare Riley even more somehow. "Well, well, well," a familiar deep baritone began. Riley froze and turned slowly towards it. "Nikolai!" he barely squeaked out. Felix noticed his companion was trembling. Appearing under the glow of the neon lights around them, Nikolai was wearing a wide, devilish grin across his face. "In the flesh," he said. "Would you looky what we have here?" He moved a little further out of the shadows, so that his entire massive figure was now clearly exposed, stopping no more than a few feet away from Felix and Riley. Fang and Damien appeared behind him and stared down at the 2 menacingly. "Looks like you've made a new friend," Nikolai said, his large eye boring straight into Felix. Riley stepped in front of him. "No, Riley!" "What do you want, Nikolai?" he asked, trying desperately to stay steady in his voice. "I've already met me quota." The grin faded from Nikolai's face and was replaced with an even more terrifying frown. When he was seemingly in a good mood, he was intimidating enough, but he was even more so when he was in a bad mood, and Riley speaking out of turn seemed to sour him. "Thank you. I am putting effort in." "You 2 wouldn't happen to be planning on going somewhere now?" Nikolai said. "Would you?" Riley passed a subtle but accusatory glance towards Felix, as if to suggest that Felix had sold him out. "What gave you that idea?" Riley asked, turning his full attention back to the threat in front of them. "Just word on the street," Nikolai answered. "Well, it isn't true," Riley assured him. "That's a relief," Nikolai said with an exaggerated sigh and a sweep of his forehead with the back of his hand before he started chuckling to himself. Bang and Damien joined him with apprehensive laughter, but when Nikolai's laughter abruptly ceased, his henchman followed suit. "I don't know if you've forgotten, but there are rules around here, Riley," Nikolai continued. "You, more than anybody, should know that. Nobody gets into the colony without my permission, and nobody gets out." Riley stared him down, growing more valiant by the second. He was standing up against someone nearly twice his size, and he wasn't backing down. "I didn't forget, Nikolai," he answered through gritted teeth. Their fierce gazes were locked for a tense moment, until finally Nikolai broke it off. "Good!" he declared, as the grin returned to his face. Anyway, I'm not here for you, Riley. I'm here for your new friend. No worries, Snow Taco. You chat or look, however much you want. I appreciate you being here either way. Riley turned back suspiciously to face Felix. What do you want with him? He asked. Nikolai turned his own attention to Felix. For a moment, he looked like he'd almost made a connection of recognition again, but it quickly faded once more when Felix cowered away. We had an agreement, Nikolai said. Don't you remember? I said 3 great fowl by tonight. I don't see any great fowl. And my associates and I are getting hungry. Felix glanced up and saw the menacing figure in front of him lick his lips. Fang and Damien turned and grinned at each other. Well, Nikolai pressed, do you have anything to say for yourself? What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? He began cackling as Riley glanced over at Felix expectantly. Felix shrugged his shoulders and shook his head. What a shame, Nikolai said, a sad frown dropping his jowls beneath his chin. I was beginning to like you, but maybe I'll like the taste of you even more. His frown curled into a wide grin. Riley stepped bravely between them. Riley, no! Riley, no! 3 great fowl? Riley asked. Come on, Nikolai, that's unreasonable for anybody, let alone a kid like him. This time, Felix wasn't going to correct Riley for calling him a kid. He was petrified and fully prepared to let Riley fight this battle for him. Felix! Felix, goddammit! You could at least help. The grin quickly faded from Nikolai's face, and he furrowed his bushy eyebrows. Taking a threatening step towards Riley, his gargantuan shadow engulfed him. He needed to prove his worth, and Nikolai said, obviously he failed, greatly so, if I might add. Since he's your new friend, Riley, I suppose I can transfer his debts to you. Now, where are my 3 great fowl? You know I don't have any great fowl either, Nikolai, Riley replied, standing steadfast. There aren't any anymore. Nikolai shifted his scornful eye between Riley and Felix, and then turned to his henchman. Regardless, he began, frighteningly calm, we'll still be having a feast tonight, boys! Fang and Damien grinned as they inched closer, stalking their future prey. Riley held his ground as Felix began to tremble beside him. The 3 predators crept closer towards them, to the point where they would have been face to face, if Felix and Riley didn't counter every advance of theirs forward with a step of their own backwards until their backs were pressed up against the dumpster. Nikolai and his henchmen crept closer still. Nobody gets in or out unless I say so, Nikolai roared indignantly in between his massive clenched teeth. Before he let Nikolai get another step closer, Riley reached out towards the ground and thrust a handful of dirt into the air. The dirt scattered into dust and struck Nikolai in his remaining good eye. With a direct blow, roaring loudly in rage, Nikolai recoiled, stumbling backwards a few steps. Run! Riley shouted, and then took off. Caught off guard, but quickly recovering, Felix chased after him, bounding right past Nikolai and managing to slip likewise past Damien and Fang, who dove to try nab him, but just narrowly missed. "After them!" Nikolai shouted in blind fury. Felix ran through the darkness, leaving Metropolis behind him. As the terrain changed to grass beneath his feet, this change in terrain nearly caused him to stumble again, but he never stopped. If he stopped, he was sure that he was a goner. He could hardly see anything in front of him, and he had lost sight of Riley, but that wasn't enough to slow him down either. The terrain beneath his feet changed once more, and he could feel dried leaves crunching under his gait. Turning back to see how close his pursuers were, without warning, Felix collided headfirst into another bush. He nearly... Blech. Oh, I need a drink. 1 second. Oh. It's getting too exciting. Too much voice acting. He really needed to learn to stop doing that. The bush swallowed him whole, snaring Felix in its depths. He held as still as possible as the needles of the bush dug into him. Poor baby. He keeps getting more injured. Outside, he could hear shouts of Nikolai and his henchmen nearby. "Yoo-hoo!" Nikolai called cheerily. That sounded not Nikolai-ish the way I said that. Way too cheerily for someone who was intent on killing and eating someone. Come out, wherever you are." Felix closed his eyes and swallowed hard. He was suspended in the bush. He was trembling, which was causing the bush to shake ever so slightly. The branches of the bush that were supporting him began to crack under his weight. If they gave way at the wrong moment, he was done for. The branches eventually did give way, with a loud crack that seemed to echo in every direction, cutting through the stillness of the night. Falling through the bush, Felix landed on the ground beneath it. He remained perfectly still, terrified of the repercussions of causing such a ruckus. Beside him, he could hear cautious footsteps crunching lightly through the dried leaves, only a few feet away. Whoever they belonged to, they were stalking him. The light crunching ceased right in front of the bush that Felix found himself in, and he could hear someone breathing lightly just beyond it. He held his own breath. Suddenly, a hand reached through the bush and grabbed him. Felix let out a pathetic cry inadvertently as the hand tugged on him. But he couldn't move. He was stuck. A voice shushed him harshly. "Riley?" Felix stammered in a whisper. "Be quiet," Riley whispered back. "Or they're gonna kill us both." "Riley, I'm stuck." "No kidding," Riley mumbled. He tried tugging at Felix again, shaking the whole bush, but Felix was hopelessly entangled. Something like that. I think they went this way. Yeah, definitely this way. I'm sure of it. That was Damien. A voice called out in the distance. Damien's. Riley stopped shaking Felix, and the two of them remained perfectly still. They could hear leaves crunching away from them in the distance until they faded into the night. With one last forceful tug, Riley yanked Felix from the bush, and the pair toppled on the ground. "Ow!" Felix cried. "Oh, you're fine," Riley assured him. He stood up and brushed himself off, then began plucking needles from his arm. "You saved my life," Felix said. "I saved my own life," Riley said without looking at him. "You were just lucky that you made it away too. I told you, if there's any trouble, I'm leaving you behind." "But you didn't," Felix reminded him. "You're nice." Turning to face him with an unamused look, Riley reached his hand out for Felix's face. Felix thought that Riley was going to slap him, but instead he plucked a needle out of his cheek. "Ow!" Felix cried again, rubbing the spot. "You might want to keep your voice down," Riley warned. Unless you want them to come back. Felix nodded somberly and stood up. Now, can we please get going? I've had enough excitement for one evening. What about... Felix began, but was quickly interrupted. No more talking, Riley said. Let's go. He turned away from Felix and began walking. Felix followed closely behind him. Oh, I got a bit scared with them turning up then. I thought Riley was going to kick the bucket a bit earlier than we thought. But he's safe. Him and Felix got out. We managed to get away from the gangsters without a single musical number. That's good. And that is going to be me, I think, for this evening. Oh, let me stretch. Okay. So, that's a good place to stop. They've got out of Metropolis. They will not be meeting Superman. Said they're gonna go somewhere, question mark. Who knows? The great wide world to the trash pandas that may or may not be trash pandas. Yeah, two bros. Felix found some family. He got adopted by an angry big brother. It's very good stuff. Yeah. Next stop, Gotham. Perfect. That is how this story should go. It should be the secret life of... Did you know they had the secret life of pets, and then they had like the DC super pets? They should have the DC trash pandas. Okay. Next week, I will be doing just two streams this week, next week. First one will be on Tuesday, and I don't know if anyone saw what Sonic Team did for April Fool's Day. Because they did something truly wonderful. They made a Sonic murder mystery visual novel. The Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, which I will stream on Tuesday. I haven't played it yet, and I am excited to play it. So we're going to be playing the Sonic the Hedgehog murder mystery visual novel on Tuesday. I would also like to say, if you haven't voted on my poll for my special 200 subs short story, you need to do that as soon as possible, because I will be working on that tomorrow evening. So you've got, give or take, and about 20 hours to get your vote in. Because after tomorrow evening, it will hopefully be written, or at least draft 1, and it will be ready to go when we get to 200 subs, which is only 2 subs away! Crazy. Which also almost guarantees that the next book I'm going to read on Sundays is going to be mine, which is a little bit nerve-wracking. It's kind of been easier with other people's work, but hey-ho. That's future me's problem, not current me's problem. And the second stream for next week will be more Misperception, so we'll find out more about what happens with Riley and Felix next week. But for now, thank you, Luke, thank you Snow Taco in the chat, thank you to anyone who lurked, thank you to anyone who watches the VODs. I have had fun, I hope you have had fun. This has been Brandy Rose Smith live from the Forbidden Library. I will see you some other time. Tuesday most likely. Goodbye!